What's going on, everybody? Thank you for clicking on the video. Today we're going to talk about top 30 Dynasty wide receiver rankings and tiers. Never too early to look ahead to next season. Hopefully you won all your championships, or at least most of them. But these rankings are a look ahead to next year. It's a snapshot, the best snapshot I can give you, projecting into next year. And I'm recording this, full disclosure, before week 18 kicks off. So hopefully there's no catastrophic injuries. Hopefully nobody does anything stupid between then and now. Hopefully nobody quits the league, anything like that. So without further ado, let's just get right into it with tier 1. And tier 1 is going to be Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. I have Jamar Chase over Justin Jefferson, but it's close. I have him ranked this way for a couple of reasons. Number one, Jamar Chase is younger. He's almost a full year younger than Justin Jefferson, and he has the quarterback locked in as long as Jamar Chase is going to be in Cincinnati, which is going to be for a while, I would think. Joe Burrow is going to be his quarterback. Justin Jefferson has gone from Kirk Cousins to Sam Darnold to whoever is going to play next year, presumably J.J. McCarthy. We don't know if J.J. McCarthy is going to be good. We're hopeful he's going to be good, but we don't know. It could be him and a combination of Daniel Jones if J.J. McCarthy's not ready to go. So we know Justin Jefferson's quarterback proof, which is why he's in tier 1, but just those two factors push Jamar Chase ahead of Justin Jefferson for me. Let's go down to tier 2. Tier 2 starts with CeeDee Lamb for me still. I know there's a little bit of uncertainty in Dallas in regards to Dak Prescott and his long-term future with the Dallas Cowboys, but you can't deny what CeeDee Lamb's been able to do over the course of his career. He's still only 25 years old. I think that's really, really good. Now, the guy who's below him is unbelievably good as well, Malik Nabers. And it's true, Malik Nabers is only 21 years old. I have no idea who the quarterback's going to be, but I really don't care, to be honest, because Malik Nabers, look at what he's been doing with the quarterback play that he's gotten. And you could very well make an argument that I should have Malik Nabers ahead of CeeDee Lamb, but maybe I'm hanging on to the past a little bit. Malik Nabers just 21 years old. Again, super impressive what he's been able to do. And then Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Nico Collins, and Brian Thomas Jr. round out this tier. And Brian Thomas Jr. is not somebody I necessarily saw coming, but if you look at his situation, I mean, it depends on how you feel about Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars as a franchise. It's a pretty dysfunctional group of people with the cons, and they probably aren't going to get the head coach right because they rarely have gotten the head coach right. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, but you have Trevor Lawrence presumably throwing Brian Thomas Jr. the ball. And then the rest of those, I mean, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Nico Collins, all three of those players are locked into situations that we like for fantasy football. Now, Matthew Stafford, who knows much longer he's going to play, but for now, we like the fact that Puka Nacua is 23 years old with Matthew Stafford. Cooper Kupp is aging right before our eyes. Amon-Ra St. Brown is as tough as a $2 steak. We know what we're getting from him. And Nico Collins paired with C.J. Stroud. Although C.J. Stroud did take a step back this year in terms of play on the field, still, we have a 25-year-old wide receiver, going to be 26, in a really good offense that we like. So moving down to tier 3 now, we have Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown, Drake London, and Jackson Smith in Jigba. And Garrett Wilson is an odd one in the sense that there's weird rumors circling out there that if Aaron Rodgers is going to be coming back, maybe Garrett Wilson demands a trade. We also don't know what the coaching staff is going to look like. We don't know who the general manager is going to be. So a lot of change is going to be coming and potentially a new team for Garrett Wilson. But we can't deny the fact that Garrett Wilson has had the best season that he's had as a pro. I believe he's the wide receiver 9 on the season. He's 24 years old. I firmly believe that he belongs in this range. And then we go to A.J. Brown. And A.J. Brown's getting up there in age. He's 27 years old, right at the age apex. But he plays with Philadelphia. He's the alpha wide receiver in that system, albeit it's a run-first system now with Saquon Barkley. But he's still, if you look at the numbers, and he's been hurt a little bit this year, but he still is right there in terms of, fantasy points per game. He's right there with Brian Thomas Jr. actually at 16.7, and A.J. Brown missed 3 games. So, again, that's what we're looking for from an elite producer at the wide receiver position, even though he is a little bit older. And then the rest of this tier, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Drake London. Drake London is interesting because we aren't really sure how good Michael Penix is going to be. Presumably we got the coaching staff there for another year, but there's some unknowns there for Drake London. Tied for wide receiver 21 in fantasy points per game. He had his best weeks earlier in the season. Week 5 with 33.4 fantasy points was the best week of the season, and then really from there, it was kind of building up to that week, and then after that, 19.4, 18.3 fantasy points, 7.4 fantasy points, and then 10.7, 17.7, 9.1, 17.3, 12, 14.3, 10. So a lot of steady production, but not as good as some of the other wide receivers this season, and he's still young, but a lot hinges on, is Michael Penix going to be good? And he certainly has been able to get him the ball, especially the last week that he played in week 6 or week 17. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba. Not quite 23 years old, will be 23 years old at the start of next season. You would think that Tyler Lockett is likely on his way out the door, definitely in terms of usage, maybe even in terms of a contract. I don't know the full details of the contract, but Tyler Lockett is getting up there. And I think you're starting to see it from Jackson Smith and Jigba now. I think we're starting to see what we were promised from Jackson Smith and Jigba when he was drafted in the first round. And, he's a 22, going to be 23-year-old wide receiver who finished 15 in fantasy points per game and really turned it on at the end of the season. So let's go down now to tier number 4. And we'll see what you guys think of this. Let me know what you think in the comments. Ladd McConkey ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. And the problem that I see with Marvin Harrison Jr. is he might have a Kyler Murray problem. I'm not sure how good of a quarterback Kyler Murray is. You can feel free to disagree with me, but just from the eye test, just from watching how Arizona Cardinals games play out, I struggle with Kyler Murray going forward, and as a result, I struggle with Marvin Harrison Jr. going forward because Kyler Murray is pretty locked in to the Arizona Cardinals for the foreseeable future. The contract is a big one. And we saw flashes from Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. He finishes the wide receiver 1 in week 2. He finishes the wide receiver 4 in week 8 against the Miami Dolphins. But really outside of that, there's a lot of mid with those two games really, flashing. But on the other hand, Ladd McConkey, I feel much more confident in Ladd McConkey with Justin Herbert, with an offensive-minded head coach in Jim Harbaugh. There's a lot more stability there, I would think, in Los Angeles. And Ladd McConkey's another one of these players. If you start from week 11 when they played the Cincinnati Bengals, 18.3 fantasy points, 14.3, 20.7, 16.8, 14.7, 29.4 fantasy points in Week 17's matchup against New England. If you played him in your championship game, you're probably pretty happy with that. So I went back and forth on that one quite a bit, but that's where we're at. with the whole Lad McConkey versus Marvin Harrison Jr. debate. And to be honest with you, I never thought I would be saying, oh, Lad McConkey is ranked ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. in Dynasty. Like, it's crazy to me that we're even talking about it or that it's even a conversation. But I think it holds water, that argument. Then we move down to Rashee Rice. And Rashee Rice is so intriguing to me. I have him as at wide receiver 14, just ahead of T. Higgins. And before the injury, Rashee Rice was dealing in Kansas City. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, he was his first read on a lot of plays, and it really seemed like Rashee Rice was the focal point of the Kansas City Chiefs offense. Then, of course, he gets hurt. Of course, we have the suspension lingering over his head. It's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 games. Rashee Rice is still just 24, going to be 25 years old. He's going to be playing with the best quarterback in the National Football League, with a coach that can scheme him open, with the best of anybody in the National Football League. So, to me, Rashee Rice, there's a case to be made that once we get past the suspension, and once we get past, the injury, once he recovers from that, you could be really discussing him in tier 2. I don't think it's crazy to think that he could be in tier 2 right next to Nico, right next to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Brian Thomas Jr. Maybe in tier 3 is a safer bet with the Garrett Wilsons and the A.J. Browns. But he's going to be playing on a good offense for the foreseeable future, as we mentioned with Andy Reid. So I fail to see the long-term downside of Rashee Rice. But, again, who knows? I mean, he's made one terrible decision already, so I would be shocked if he does something stupid like that again, although who knows? But I do think that Rashee Rice has a really good chance to move up these dynasty rankings this time. Like, if we jump forward a year from now, I think that there's a really good chance that Rashee Rice could be in tier 2. So we'll move on down. T. Higgins, Jordan Addison. T. Higgins, I did not realize this, but T. Higgins, I know he didn't play in 5 games, but he finished tied with Justin Jefferson in fantasy points per game. I have never really been a huge T. Higgins fan. Now, that a lot of that has to do with the Week 17 blow-up where he scored 40 points. And if you had him, you probably won your fantasy football matchups, especially if you had, T. Higgins, Mike Evans, and Malik Neighbors. I mean, you probably just ran away with it. But still, 19.3 fantasy points per game, missed 5 games. But you talk about, aside from 1 weeks 13 through 17, I mean, 17.9 fantasy points, the Week 14 dud, 4.3 fantasy points, but then 19.8, 40.1 fantasy points. And there's, in all likelihood, the Bengals, they might franchise tag him, they might not franchise tag him. I don't know what the Bengals' long-term plans with T. Higgins is going to be, but it's still, I mean, because he's going to be entering, they franchise tagged him in 2024, and in 2025 he's due to be unrestricted free agent. So who knows? But again, a lot of uncertainty there, but you cannot deny the production and the like. T. Higgins is a really good player. And then Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison's interesting because he is another one of these players that produces spike weeks. He's the wide receiver 20 in fantasy points per game, but you look at his game log, and you're like, 6.5 fantasy points, then he missed 2 weeks, but then 22.9, then 6.6, then they had their bye. Then you have a couple mid-weeks, 9.6, 4.2 fantasy points, then 16.1, then 4.9, then 15.1, then 30.2, then 9.4, then 39.3. So again, we have a lot of spikes, a lot of peaks and valleys with Jordan Addison. But when I was looking at these rankings, or when I was, determining where these players would be ranked, when I was forming these rankings, however you want to say it, Jordan Addison, going to be 23 years old. He's in a good offense. He's never going to see the number one corner on a defense because you have Justin Jefferson there. And you have Kevin O'Connell, who's a really good offensive coach. And the Vikings are going to pass the ball quite a bit. That they like to pass the ball. They like to play at a high pace of play. And then we have Zay Flowers, 24 years old, and George Pickens. Those are kind of two players that haven't really produced to the level consistently. Now, there have been games here and there, but they haven't really produced consistently the way that we would like. Zay Flowers, the wide receiver, 33 in fantasy points per game, averaging 12.9 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues. And if I can find George Pickens on this list, I think he's even further down. George Pickens, wide receiver 35 in fantasy points per game this season. Steelers, they're not gonna. They're probably moving on from Russell Wilson. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe they bring him back. I think that would actually be really good for George Pickens's outlook, depending on what the contract is with Russell Wilson, how long it is for, all that stuff. Let's move down to tier 5. We have Rome Odunze, Xavier Worthy, Devonta Smith, Jaden Reed, DK Metcalf. Now, Rome Odunze didn't produce this season, but the Bears had a weird year. And Rome Odunze, he has the draft capital that we like. He is paired with a quarterback that I still like. I know Caleb Williams had his ups and downs, and he's holding on to the ball too long, taking way too many sacks. But if you think about Caleb Williams for a second, okay, we have 3 offensive coordinators in 1 year because Shane Waldron, Thomas Brown, and now the wide receivers coach, I think, is calling plays. I can't remember his name. So you have 3 different voices in your ear. You had the catastrophe that was Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron. And you have a banged-up offensive line that was subpar to begin the season. Yeah, you had all those weapons, Rome Odunze included, but it just kind of feels like we should have saw this coming with Chicago. And with Keenan Allen being there, with DJ Moore being there, we kind of should have known that Rome Odunze wasn't going to have the greatest first season. It's very similar to Jackson Smith and Jigba in many ways. But I still believe in that talent. Still believe in Caleb Williams. So, again, I could be a little bit low on Rome Odunze. Let me know what you think. Xavier Worthy is somebody that I'm very perplexed about where certain people have Xavier Worthy, and I get it. At times, it feels a little gimmicky with the way that the Chiefs use him, and presumably we're gonna have. Rashee Rice returning at some point, and he's likely going to be the wide receiver 2 in the offense. But, he's had his moments in this offense, especially lately, especially week 15, 16, 17. He's averaged over 20 fantasy points per game. So if you played him in the fantasy football playoffs, you were very happy with that. And before then, we have a wide receiver 20 finish in week 11. We had the horrible week 9 finish where he actually scored -1 fantasy points. But in week 1, he scored 20 points. In week 4, he scored 16.3 points. In week 8, 13.7 points. The point is this. I think Andy Reid and the Chiefs are some of the most creative play callers in the National Football League, if not the most creative. And they're going to find ways to involve a first-round draft pick in their offense. They just will. Now, I understand the concern. The concern would be, okay, well, it wasn't until week 14 where he played on 80% of the snaps or more. It was really somewhere in the neighborhood of high 50s, 60s, maybe 70% of the snaps was he playing. But there are some other wide receivers that you could say that about. That don't necessarily play on all 100% of the snaps all the time. So again, the usage is a slight concern for Xavier Worthy. I'm a lot higher on Xavier Worthy than most people. He's still just 21, going to be 22 years old in 2025. So I think, there's a lot of upside in drafting Xavier Worthy and trading for Xavier Worthy right now. Then the rest of this tier, Devonta Smith and Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed's another one of those guys where, I feel as though, and sometimes I feel like I'm on the crazy, like, I don't know, like I'm on an island with some of this stuff. And I like Jaden Reed. I have a lot of Jaden Reed on my dynasty teams. But the Packers offense has so many wide receivers there that they like to use. Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, who's, I know he deals with injuries, but he's another one of these players where it's, 50%, 60% of the snaps. Like on a good game, he's seeing 70% of the snaps. And he's very similar to Xavier Worthy in the sense that they like to use him on end arounds. They like to, give him those little pop passes. And one of these players is, one of these players is 24 years old and Jaden Reed. And the other player in Xavier Worthy is 21 years old. And to me, there's a lot less competition for touches, which is why I have Xavier Worthy ranked ahead of Jaden Reed, which I don't think is a popular opinion right now. You can let me know what you think in the comments. But that's the way I see it. And, Devonta Smith is the number 2 wide receiver. He's 26 years old, number 2 wide receiver on a run-first offense with with Saquon Barkley there. And Saquon's going to be there, for, I would say, at least another season, if not 2 more seasons. Let's go to tier 6, and we're going to round out this top 30 with tier 6. So we go Terry McLaurin, Chris Olave, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, who will be coming off of an injury, Tyreek Hill, and I'll throw Jameson Williams on there because Jameson Williams, he's so interesting. I'll admit that I did not, aside from being a top 11 pick, he was I think the 11th pick in that draft. That I remember the Lions traded up, I believe, with the Vikings. I could be wrong about that. But I mean, this offense is so good, and I know Ben Johnson might be leaving, but again, this is another guy, with the peaks and valleys. I mean, he was the wide receiver 24 in fantasy points per game, Jameson Williams on the season. 24.4 fantasy points in week 1, 14.4, and then we go down to 1.2 in week 3, then 16, then a bye, then 17.7, then 0.6, then he misses a couple games, and then we go from 8.3 fantasy points when he returns from injury in week 10 to 22.6 the next week. So again, it's the very definition of a player who's probably better in best ball, but he's electric. This offense is really good. I like Jared Goff as a distributor of the football. The offensive line's good. He's going to have time to let Jameson Williams get down the field, and I think he belongs inside, like I have him technically at 31. I really thought about putting him right next to Jalen Waddle, maybe ahead of DJ Moore in these rankings. I really thought long and hard about it because, again, he might not be as solid of a player as those guys. DJ Moore, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, they probably have higher floors on a week-to-week basis, especially DJ Moore. But Jameson Williams is a lot younger. Anyway, let me know. I'm blabbering on about this, so let me know what you think in the comments. My have the mighty have fallen with DJ Moore and Jalen Waddle. I was a lot higher on these 2 guys last year. So again, DJ Moore's locked into what I think is a pretty good situation, so he could climb, but he is 27 years old. Who knows what's going to happen with Tyreek Hill? I do have Tyreek Hill technically ranked as my number 30 wide receiver on this list. But if he decides to retire, he is going to be 31 years old. Who knows? Jalen Waddle could bump up a little bit, and then Brandon Ayuk. It depends on how his recovery goes. It depends if the 49ers decide to sign Brock Purdy to a long-term deal. A lot of uncertainty in the air, but I still feel like Brandon Ayuk belongs in this top 30. So there it is on the screen, my complete top 30 Dynasty wide receiver rankings and tiers. No rookies included. I'm sure that'll be another video where I throw the rookies in and just so you can see that. Let me know what you think of these rankings in the comments. Let me know where you agree, where you disagree. Let me know where you think I'm off my rocker, crazy, stupid. Let me know where you think it's pretty good. I would appreciate both. Give me a like, drop a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as it comes out. And until next time, be good, everybody. Be good. Hopefully you don't have a championship in week 18. We will see you later.